Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. This is the weekly news wrap-up for Friday, May 9th, 2014. Well, the Ukraine crisis is spidering off in ways that nobody would have dreamed of just a few months ago. It's becoming more of a psychological and financial or economic war. Could it turn into a shooting war? Sure. Yes, it could. But I don't see that right now. Look at this headline right here. You see Putin, he runs up to the line and then he backs off. Putin diffuses tensions in the Ukraine crisis. Now, supposedly, this is in USA Today, supposedly Putin has backed some troops away from the border. NATO says no, he hasn't. He also has told the the pro-Russian Eastern Ukrainians to, hey, don't do that referendum, where you get independence or you want to join Russia. Of course, they're ignoring Putin. They're going to go ahead with it, and they're still fighting over their, tooth and nail. Although the death and the killing has died down some, it's far from over. It's in turmoil, major turmoil. Now, a lot of folks say, yeah, could this turn into a shooting war? I thought it would turn into a shooting war right away. I was wrong about that. My sources have told me, and I think they're right, that he's not going to wade in. He's going to allow Ukraine to just spiral into chaos and pick up the pieces later. I mean, think about this. In the next 2 years, Ukraine needs $50 billion just to keep the country stable. $50 billion, that's the estimate, in the next couple of years. Who's going to provide that money? Now, I know Ukraine has gas reserves in the West, and maybe that's how they're going to collateralize that, but still, I think things get much worse in Eastern and Western, the entire Ukraine, before they get any better. And we're going into summer. Wait until this coming winter. I can't imagine their fuel prices are going to be any cheaper in Ukraine. But meanwhile, there are reports of, the U.S. Is ratcheting up their sanctions, but are they really? I mean, the IRS is supposed to, go after Russian banks to make sure nobody's, hiding tax money over there or whatever, which is, ratcheting it up a little bit. But if they really wanted to sanction Russia, wouldn't they sanction Gazprom? Why is Gazprom, their big, energy company, why is that off limits? Because it might hurt our allies in Europe? That they're not really keen on any of these sanctions because in Germany alone, 6,000 companies are doing business inside Russia. Also, if you take a look at what Russia is doing, I mean, what did they do this week? They had these drills where they simulated nuclear attacks and their response to nuclear attacks, which makes people feel a little freaky. All of a sudden, of course, Russia says, oh, these were already, scheduled drills that we were having for our nuclear arsenal. And then you see the bombers testing the airspace over the UK. And this past week, they had Russian bombers flying up and down the coast of California. That's the psychological warfare. Now, could it turn into real warfare? Sure. But the psychological warfare, the fear, could it damage markets? Could it hurt people's confidence? Yes, sure it could. And then you have the economic warfare, where Russia is leading the parade to get the rest of the world to stop using the dollar in trade settlement internationally, the world's reserve currency. That they're trying to take away the West's ability to finance anything, including war. And I think this whole game over in Ukraine has just kicked the use of the dollar, the loss of the use of the dollar, the people wanting to stop using that or think about stop using the dollar, I think it's kicked it up to another level. And the warfare is both psychological and economic or financial. Yes, we could still have a shooting war. I don't think that's Putin's game. I don't think that's his game. I don't. The IRS official at the center of the targeting scandal, the targeting of conservative groups, groups with the name Patriot in it, is now being held in contempt of Congress. The House voted, this week to hold Lois Lerner, that IRS official that's heading up the portion of the IRS that approved these tax-exempt organizations, conservative groups. The liberal groups weren't attacked, even though they say they weren't. It was conservative groups. Also, conservative groups, we find out this week also that are taxed, 10% of conservatives, that involved in this scandal were audited. And, the average is what, 1%? But 10% off the charts 10 times. Another little dirty fact, not a smidgen of evidence that one party would be using the Internal Revenue Service as a way to thwart its political opposition. That's exactly what happened there, I said it. That is repugnant. And then for the president to say, not a smidgen of evidence, please, stop. It looks like a duck. It walks like a duck. Duck. Congressman Trey Gowdy, who was there, I was watching these hearings that day, and she read this statement, and then she, pled the fifth. And when Gowdy's turn was his turn to talk, he's a former federal prosecutor. He said, "Whoa! You cannot testify and read a statement." Now he says she made 17 points. You can't testify, and then when it's time for people to ask you questions, embarrassing questions, whatever, or questions that could incriminate you, no, I had my say. I've testified. She testified. She swore. She read her statement. She testified. He says you can't do both. You can't testify, say what you want to say, and then plead the fifth. You can't do that. Not when you're under oath in front of Congress. That's why she got this contempt of Congress charge. Mostly, this is the main reason why she got this contempt of Congress charge. And, USA Today, for example, you would think, and this is what I mean by lying by omission. So here's that headline that I was showing you with Putin, right? Okay, so that's this top story. That's a pretty big story, Putin, Ukraine. But so I looked in here, I thought, well, where is the IRS? This is a big deal. Somebody got charged with contempt. You could go to jail. You'd be fined thousands of dollars. Where is that? They decided not to cover it. This is a news organization. This is an affront to the First Amendment. I don't care what party, if the party you're favorable to, the Obama administration, and clearly the mainstream media is favorable, if the party you're favoring is doing First Amendment violations, don't you think a news organization should at least mention it the day after it happens? This is lying by omission. This ought to be listen, if Putin's here, then this story should be, somewhere on the front page. It's nowhere to be found. It's not even mentioned in the other stories. Oh, by the way, a major IRS chief was held in contempt of Congress, and her boss at the time, the head of the IRS, had was somewhat 50 meetings with Obama. When he was asked, he said, well, we talked about Easter eggs one time. Really? You got meetings with the president, and you spent time talking about Easter eggs, and you're the head of the IRS? Really? Using the IRS as a weapon, no matter which party is in power, is repugnant. It's wrong, and somebody ought to go to jail. And this is another one of these things that the left says, oh, this is not a real story. It's a hoax. No. Anybody in the news organization ought to be scared to death over this kind of use of the IRS. And it wasn't a bunch of rogue agents in Cincinnati. A lot more to be told about, this story. A lot more. And let me tell you, the breakdown on the voting to hold Lerner in contempt of Congress, 6 Democrats voted for it. Of course, the spin is, oh, well, they're in troubled district. Hey, listen, they could have not voted for it. They could vote their conscience and not vote. They voted for it. Also, after that vote to hold Lerner in contempt of Congress, there was another vote, and 26 Democrats voted to ask Eric Holder, the Attorney General, to step aside and appoint a special counsel to look into this matter. Eric Holder himself, there's a bunch of documents that aren't coming out. Same thing with the Benghazi situation. Lots of documents not coming out. We'd have to have all these big investigations and all this time wasted if the White House would just turn over the documents that Congress is, asking for, requesting. And incidentally, Trey Gowdy, that former federal prosecutor, he's been picked to head up, to consolidate, basically, to head up the investigation on Benghazi. Now, listen, the White House said it was because of a video and people were protesting, and it was a spontaneous attack, and it didn't involve al-Qaeda. Lie. The lies. Wrong. Lie. No gray area. Lie. Everybody knew it The military knew it. The CIA knew it. The people on the ground knew it. The Prime Minister of Libya knew it. And said it. No. It was a terrorist attack. It would, yeah, I'm sure people were upset about the video, but not that night. That wasn't what that was about. And why did they lie? Why did they lie? I think it was to protect the President of the United States and also the presumptive Democratic frontrunner for president, the presumptive candidate, Hillary Rodham Clinton. I think they were protecting her. And let me tell you, the Benghazi situation is far worse for Hillary Clinton than Monica Lewinsky resurfacing. I pity her. I mean, here is this young 20-year-old girl, and the President of the United States wanted to pay her some attention. She's lucky she had that dress, but I digress. The Benghazi issue is a big issue. The left will call this a hoax. No, it's not a hoax. 4 people died. That is not a hoax. Al-Qaeda-backed rebels are on the run in Syria. They had to give up a major city, Homs. Had to give it up. They had to negotiate a retreat. This is a major blow for the Al-Qaeda-backed rebels. Of course, on the other side, Hezbollah is being backed by Iran and Syria, and they're also, fighting. But this is a major blow to this war in Syria, which is claiming the lives of, 140, 50,000 people. It's not over. But I'll tell you, it sure is going to make the Assad regime much harder to remove. Remember a few years back, General Wesley Clark, several years back, spilled the beans on the plan for the Middle East to destabilize, and all these countries had to be destabilized. And, on that list was Libya, check, and on that list was also Syria. And remember a couple of years ago when this thing started getting going, the civil war? Remember I told you that Russia's they're not going to back down. They're not going to give up their naval port in Tartus. They spent billions of dollars on that. Is a strategic port for them in the eastern Mediterranean. No, they're not leaving. They're not going to give it up. The reason why we didn't fly sorties and bomb the daylights out of the Syrians like we did in Libya, because the Russians were there. And they weren't going to give it up. And they didn't give it up. This isn't over, but that plan to rearrange the Middle East, oh boy, it's been delayed quite significantly. Next up, I got to read you this headline from USA Today. When I read it, I thought, oh, that's rich. Okay, Holder, no bank is too big to jail. No banker is too big to jail. This is according to Eric Holder. And I thought to myself, over a year ago, that's not what he said. I'll tell you what he said a year ago when he testified to Congress. Let me read it to you. I got to put my glasses on. I'm an old guy. He said that he was concerned that criminal charges against the top bankers might, here's the quote, have a, quote, negative impact on the national economy and perhaps even the world economy. It might have a negative impact if we jail these big bankers, and it might even have a negative impact on the world economy. Thus, the term too big to jail. And now he's out with this headline, Holder, no bank is too big to jail. How about the bank executives? I mean, there's been I've been ranting on about this, LIBOR, hundreds of trillions of dollars in interest rate rigging fraud. The gold market fraud. I mean, look at J.P. Morgan. They paid a fine to avoid criminal charges. This was widely reported. Paid a fine to avoid criminal charges for helping Bernie Madoff in his $60 billion fraud, and nobody goes to jail over that. Nobody's even charged. HSBC admitted to laundering money for terrorists and drug cartels, and it paid a fine. $1.9 billion. But it paid a fine. And he's talking about no bank is too big to jail. He's talking about a couple of European banks that, may be helping countries avoid sanctions. You mean like HSBC? Standard Chartered did the same thing. And Deloitte Consulting helped them. And they got a fine, and they were removed from the financial industry. They were told they couldn't be in the financial industry for a year. That was it? No criminal charges? You helped a country, that was laundering money for terrorists? And Snowden is a criminal? He's talking about banks that are helping people evade taxes. These are European banks. But none of the big, not J.P. Morgan, not any of the banks that have done these crazy things at Bank of America. They lost $4,000 million, incidentally. They don't know where it went. They don't know where that went. We had some bad accounting. That's not a crime. That's just plain sloppy, stupid. But him saying that no bank is too big to jail, but yet they've allowed bankers to run wild. I mean, there's foreclosure fraud, which involved, forgery. It was called it robo-signing. It was forgery and perjury and fraud on the court. Pass, pay a fine. Laundering money for drug cartels and terrorists, pay a fine. Securities fraud, where they packaged up all this mortgage debt that the Fed is still buying, this toxic junk the banks dreamed up. Nobody goes to jail over that. Isn't that securities fraud when you say something is AAA and then, oh yeah, it's toxic, it's no good? Isn't that fraudulent? Anyway, the long and short of it is that there still hasn't been not one single big banker been prosecuted, let alone put in jail, let alone prosecuted, not one single big banker, for massive fraud on a grand scale that has been reported over and over again, widely reported, massive frauds and schemes by these bankers, and nobody is prosecuted. But now Holder is deciding that, well, no bank is too big to jail. I'll believe it when I see it. Thank you for supporting USA Watchdog with your comments and donations. Thank you so much for coming on here and making this a part of your community. I really appreciate it. That's the way I see it. I'm Greg Hutter. Have a nice weekend.